Hi, I'm Sam Coles. I'm the principal flute in the Philharmonia. The flute is a member of the woodwind family, and it differs from the other woodwind instruments in that it doesn't have a reed, and you make the sound by blowing across this little hole here and lengthening or shortening the tube with your fingers. This is basically a 19th century invention, the flute. Throughout the 18th century and up till about 1850, the flute was a conical instrument made of wood. But as composers started writing bigger and bigger symphonies and concert halls got bigger and bigger, there was a need for more volume and more dexterity in the instrument. And Theobald Boehm came up with this idea in the middle of the 19th century of making a cylindrical flute out of metal, which gave you much more dexterity. You could whiz around much quicker, and it was a much more powerful instrument. So that's what he did, and that's what he came up with, and that's what we're still playing today. Well, there is an interesting story about how he came to invent this flute. He was not just a flute maker, he was also a very fine flute player and composer. And he came over to England in the early 19th century, and he had the opportunity of hearing a great English flute player who was called Nicholson. And Nicholson was playing on a wooden flute, but he'd done some strange things to his flute. He'd made all the holes a bit bigger, and he made this absolutely huge sound, and he played with great virtuosity. And so Boehm, who had never heard anything like it, said he's got to do something about that. He's got to be able to combat this extraordinary flute player. So he went all the way home and started working on the new patent, which was going to be a metal flute, which was going to be cylindrical with much bigger holes than the wooden flutes of the time. And so he actually invented this flute with the sole purpose of playing faster and louder than this great English flute player. And, well, he did. He succeeded. Well, the Baroque flute was a conical wooden flute, meaning the body gets thinner as it goes down. And the Baroque flute had just one key here, and you have to get all the notes just through holes in the tube. You've got to get all the notes just by combinations of your fingers. It's a very simple instrument, and you get these wonderful notes, which are called forked notes, where you have to have holes. It doesn't go just straight down like this. You have to have holes in between your fingers, which make very strange and weak notes and weak colours on notes. And these actually give the Baroque flute a very unequal and expressive quality. Often modern flute players, when they talk about the Baroque flute, they talk about the inequality of the notes and the inequality of the sound on a Baroque flute as some kind of fault in this instrument. But in fact, it's extremely expressive, and it's actually one of the qualities of a Baroque flute, these strange notes. And the composers always use these strange fork notes for a particular poignancy in a phrase or a particularly expressive note. You'll always find it comes on a fork note. Anyway, throughout the Baroque period and into the classical period, the end of the 18th century, you get more and more keys added to the flute. You start with one key. The Mozart flute's got about 4 or 5 or 6 keys, and they continue adding keys until you get to about 12 keys. But it's still a conical flute. But these keys are just making it slightly easier to play in tune and slightly easier to go around the flute at great speed. And then, as I said, the great change comes in the middle of the 19th century, where they change Theobald Boehm changes the material that we're playing the flute with, makes it in metal and makes it a cylindrical flute. And that was the end of the conical flute and the beginning of the modern flute. There are differences between the gold and the silver flute, but I don't really want to make a value judgment about which one's better. I think it's more about just preference and context, maybe. I think a silver flute has a slightly brighter sound. I think they carry very nicely across the orchestra. I think a gold flute has a slightly... It's heavier. It's a heavier instrument, and I feel it's got a slightly darker, richer, more complex sound than a silver flute. But I still like silver flutes. I've got a silver flute at home. But this is what I'm enjoying playing the most at the moment.
If you've enjoyed learning about the instruments in the orchestra, why not try our iPad app, The Orchestra, featuring Esa-Pekka Salonen and the Philharmonia Orchestra. Fully interactive video playback lets you view the orchestra from all angles, and the revolutionary beat map shows you who is playing when. Follow along with synchronized scores. Hear the inside scoop in audio commentaries, and get a 360-degree view of all the instruments. Available for download in the App Store on iTunes.